Hello and welcome to another edition of the China in Africa podcast. I'm Eric Olander, and as always, I'm joined by Cobus van Staden of Wits University in Johannesburg, South Africa. A very good afternoon to you, Cobus.
Good afternoon.
Cobus, today we're going to be talking about tourism, and it's a subject that we really haven't addressed much on the program, but it's absolutely fascinating. Let me give you a couple statistics about the Chinese, because it's not even fascinating, it's mind-blowing. Think about this. In 2016, last year, some of the latest statistics are out, 121 million Chinese traveled overseas. Now, that's more than any other country in the world, according to the government, and they're forecasting now that it's expected to grow to 150 million in just the next few years. And the growth rate since 2010 has been absolutely astonishing, 18 to 20%. Which, when you consider the fact that, this is a population where only 6% have a passport, the room for growth is just tremendous. And what's interesting is that Africa, although not one of the top destinations, is rapidly becoming a popular destination, I should say. Typically Chinese, like most people, like Americans, we like to go to Mexico, we like to go to Canada, we go to London. We really don't venture too far abroad, and the Chinese themselves are very similar. Japan, Hong Kong, Vietnam are some of the top destinations. But Cobus, let me tell you a little bit about your country, which is South Africa, which is one of the most popular destinations. 150,000 visitors last year, direct air flights now. They've cleaned up the visa system. In 2008, only 2.8% of Chinese tourists went to Africa. In 2014, the number tripled to 9.4%, and they expect that to grow by 50% every year. I mean, it's just a huge market that's coming down now.
And increasingly, African countries are in an arms race to try to capture some of these Chinese tourists. But what we're seeing is that African countries are frequently really unprepared to the extent that they really don't know how to cater for Chinese tourists at all.
Well, one person who's actually trying to cater to Chinese tourists is Sandra Ruese, who's a director at the tourism consulting advisory firm Gulu and Hurst in Kampala, Uganda. Sandra, welcome to the program. Very good afternoon to you.
Thank you.
Sandra,
thank you for having me.
You have a background in Chinese affairs. You've studied Chinese. I think you've lived in China for a little bit, and you're kind of trying to wave this flag to everybody in Uganda and Africa to say, hey, the Chinese are important. There's a huge market and a giant business opportunity. It makes sense when you see the numbers that I just kind of read, which are just these huge numbers, and you can see it. I saw it myself in South Africa last year. More and more Chinese tourists are arriving. I would expect that you must be very busy. Your phone must be ringing off the hook with people asking, how do I cater to these Chinese tourists? I mean, this must be a boom time for you, right?
It should be ideally a very, very opportune time for the whole of East Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa in particular, because we have unique experiences. Our ecology, flora and fauna is very unique in the global scheme of things. But Africans have taken quite a long time to warm up to China. Since I launched my consultancy 2 years ago, I rarely get the kind of interest that I was hoping to, because our governments or our institutions, our tourism fraternities have not really appreciated the spending habits, the consumerism behind the Chinese powerhouse. And so they're not really doing it the way they should be. They're not focusing strategically on China in the context of Asia. So they're just continuing with their old marketing strategies, techniques, employing the same skills they've been doing. And therefore, we're not experiencing the same growth in outbound Chinese coming into Africa as we should be.
And Sandra, to your mind, where are they making the biggest mistake? What are they doing at the moment specifically, and what should they be doing?
The first error is that they are not matching their tourism products with specific regions within China. This is home to 1.34 billion people. You cannot just launch services and tourism products expecting everyone to appreciate what you have to offer. China is a very regionalized market, and therefore you have to match your tourism products, which means you have to get expert and professional advice on how to go about that so that you can actually zero in on the demographics that will work for you. Also, they're not using Chinese social media. They're using the traditional Twitters and WeChat and Facebooks, which are not really homegrown solutions that the Chinese are very accustomed to. They're also going in with the wrong budget. Chinese media is slightly more expensive, and you have to actually sit down and go through the costing and how you're going to financially prepare to brand your services, to train your staff, to rework your floor plan, redesign, for example, your restaurant and sitting area, and as well as recruit liaison and relationship managers. So it's going to cost you quite a bit more, upwards of $5,000 for sure.
Yeah, well, 5,000 seems modest given the size of the Chinese media market. But let's talk a little bit about the Chinese tourist and how they may be different from the more traditional tourists who come to Africa, presumably from Europe and Brazil and the Americas. You talked a little bit about it that, African tour operators and hotels have to kind of retrofit their offer to better accommodate the Chinese tourists and what they want. Talk to us a little bit about the profile of the Chinese tourists and how they're different from other tourists that may come to Kenya, Uganda, South Africa.
The Chinese fundamentally are looking for an experience where they can gather bragging rights. The more blingier, the more wow factor, the more unique, the more interesting they will be able to, put their money into that kind of thing. They're looking forward to making reservations, to go on a wildlife safari where there's like a unique experience out there. It's not just going out, seeing elephants and lions and heading back straight to your campsite. But they're looking for an experience. They're looking for you to package as much as you can into their 1 week or 3-day holiday. They really don't rest. They don't say, oh, we've gone to the beach, now let's go back to the hotel and take some time off. They want to go to the beach. They want to do the bungee jumping. They want to do the quad bike driving experience. They want to see the horses if you have any. I mean, they want a complete package. And that's why it's a bit complicated if you have only one offering in that 3-day or 4-day tour that you're selling them. It might not resonate very well with them. As well, their culinary experience expectations are very different. Their dining, even the hours that they tend to snack a lot in between during the day. So you need to cater to their expectations. As well, they're looking to buy as much in terms of art craft and such like things so that they can carry with them and show and brag about it to their families back in their countries.
Sandra, if you could unpack that last one a little bit, like I know that my stereotype of Chinese tourists overseas are that they love gambling and that they love shopping. What kind of shopping do you recommend people, tourist operators in Africa to set up? What kind of shopping really appeals to Chinese tourists, and how do they like to do their shopping?
They prefer luxury. I mean, money is not an object for them, and they come prepared for this. So in terms of, say, homegrown products, if you have a specialty coffee or tea or wine that is expensive, unique, and there has to be a history behind that product. Don't just put it on the shelf and put some Chinese instruction there and the pricing as well and expect them to just quickly go and grab that and pay for it. They want to know the history behind what makes that product unique. And that is what they're looking for, more in expensive luxury items. They can be edibles, they can be consumable other items. It just depends on what your country has to offer, because not every country can offer wine. Not every country has coffee to give to sell their arrival. So it just depends. It's just the pricing has to be higher. They're looking for something much more expensive than the ordinary tourist who just walks around looking for bargain items.
Sandra, I want you to try and explain something to me because it just makes no sense to me and what's going on. So last year, I went to go see Cobus in Johannesburg, and I had a free afternoon. And so I went on a safari, like a lot of tourists do. And so when I got to the game park, I met one of the rangers who kind of gives us a tour. And I said, where are your tourists coming from? And he said, oh, by far now, our number one source of tourists and visitors are from China. And I was fascinated by that because there were no signs in Chinese. there was nothing to indicate that this was, a major source of revenue for this big safari park. I then we had lunch, and we stopped, and I asked the restaurateur, I said, it seems like there's a lot of Chinese, but why aren't there any Chinese here? And he was really negative. Oh, the Chinese, they don't buy, they don't spend, they don't eat. And it occurred to me that the whole experience for the Chinese was really not very friendly. There wasn't any food that was catered to them. There were no signs. In fact, the only signs that were there in Chinese in this one park were signs in Chinese about "don't kill our rhinos." So it was a very negative kind of thing. And so what I guess I don't understand is that it would seem to me to be common sense as a business operator, which these parks are, that if my largest source of customers comes from wherever, I will adapt my product to better suit those customers. What is the block for these tour operators and these destinations to not recognize that and do something about it? What's going on?
Because they are putting much more emphasis on the partnerships and getting into MOUs, memorandum of understandings, with all these travel agencies in China. That's where the focus is. So once they sign up and then get into the whole seasonal advertising and hosting of arrivals, that's where it stops. They don't go beyond skills development, staff sensitization training. I mean, a few do, like in the case of Seychelles and Mauritius, have really invested a lot in their budget for these kinds of bringing people up to speed and showing them the ropes, how to actually keep return business from China, not just hosting one tour group, but keep them coming, because you show them that they're welcome, and you have chefs who cater to them. So they have an alternative menu to the traditional French or English-based or British-based menu that you find a lot being served in major hotels. So the focus ends with the MOU or the partnership agreement with the airlines or with the travel agents in China. There's nothing that they look into beyond that. And that is where the major mistake is. I mean, hosting Chinese arrivals is an end-to-end rebranding exercise. It will cost you, and you have to understand you need to take time. Don't just jump into signing agreements when your ground staff is not ready, your immigration service is not ready, your restaurants and hotels are not ready, your shopping malls are not ready for them. I mean, you have to look at it in the larger context, not just doing it piecemeal, hosting them and then stopping there.
However, most tourism operators in Africa don't have the kind of funds to do that full-scale overhaul. If you're speaking with someone who is willing to make some of these changes but need to do it step by step, where would you advise them to start? Like, what is the first thing that they can change, or first few things that they can change to start making it a more friendly experience for the Chinese tourists?
Okay, because the Chinese rely 90% of the time on digital information to make decisions on the destinations they'll be booking or having their honeymoons or vacations in. You have to take social media and Chinese social spaces extremely seriously. So I would say if your budget is not that grand, please focus first on translating your promotional material, but keeping in mind you have to use a certain tourism Chinese. Don't use academic Chinese when you're literally translating your website to cater to anyone, looking to find out more about where you are, what you have to offer, what's the weather like, what are the prices. So begin with the digital exercise, rebrand yourself there, and then you'll be ready to offer a one-stop platform for the Chinese to quickly go in and decide whether or not to make a reservation with you. So you have to take that seriously. You also have to retrain your staff, the concierge, your restaurant staff, the ones who have a lot of face time with the arrivals, and bring them up to speed. What works, what doesn't work with the Chinese guests who will be coming in. So if your budget is a bit restricted and you're not able to do the entire process, the whole rebranding exercise, then please begin with your digital presence. It'll take you a long way in building a brand in the hearts and minds in Chinese.
It's interesting because we were talking before the show, and I asked you, I said, well, okay, if African companies, tour operators, travel agencies, and destinations are not kind of stepping up. Well, who is? And you pointed out and you said that the Chinese themselves are now kind of building a tourism infrastructure in Africa. And they are, taking care of the bus systems. They're opening restaurants. The buses are taking people to the Chinese restaurants, and they're catering to their own tourists. And that was just absolutely fascinating to me because so often in the China-Africa dialogue, we hear about the Chinese kind of taking advantage of Africans. They are kind of profiting at the expense of Africans. But here we have a situation where, Kenyans, Ugandans, South Africans, all are not stepping up to the opportunity, and it's there for people to take, and the Chinese entrepreneur is seeing it and doing it for themselves. So in some ways, I have a lot of respect for that.
Yes, they're not wasting time because it's been 10 years. What we're discussing should have started in 2006, not 2016. So there's been a lapse. A decade has gone by, and no one is really doing it the way the professionals advise them to do it. And a lot of failure rates have been reported because, of course, you're going into something that you're ill-equipped to. So the Chinese have seen an opportunity. They understand their people very well. And the investors who come in with multi-million-dollar loans to launch right here on the continent itself are doing exactly what I have been preaching for the last 7 years, because I've been doing this, slowly as I pick up my my understanding of this industry. And now that I'm fully conversant with it, I now, go to some of their websites or go to some of their conferences and hear them talking about the same thing I have been advising the tourism fraternity right here in East Africa. And they're doing it exceptionally well because of the speed at which they're able to execute on their decisions. They're very quick thinkers. They're very strategic. Of course, the Chinese are very, very calculated. So they know exactly what products will fit their target markets in China. And they offer the full tourism packaged experience, a rich experience in 1 week or three-day or 4-day tour.
Yeah, this is so fascinating to hear, and also it makes me sad as an African to see Africa being again kind of pushed out of its own main industry. I mean, Africa, like tourism, should be Africa's meal ticket. Africa has these amazing things to offer, and now they don't seem to be willing to learn how to offer it. So now they're being pushed out. It makes me sad. Do you sometimes find yourself shouting at African tourism operators to try and get them to move?
I literally bang on some of these CEOs' doors. I'm there. I'm in their reception lounges, waiting sometimes for up to 3 hours just to have 5 minutes to sit down and say, "You guys, wake up. You will be swallowed by the big boys when they finally land." What you're seeing right now in terms of Chinese tourism investment into Africa is really not as grand as it will become, because the money is there and they're being bankrolled by very, very serious loans which are issued by the government as part of the strategy One Belt, One Road initiative under the current president right now. So they're being encouraged to migrate to Africa, to Australia, to Canada. Go, take this money, invest in these places so that the money keeps moving, because the recession, of course, dealt a very big blow to the Chinese export-oriented market. So now, under this Ilu initiative, the government is actually encouraging more and more Chinese to apply for passports and to actually go into the banks and gather loans and go and launch into the spa industry, casino industry, transportation. They're there. Just here in Uganda, 2 Chinese-owned taxi operations have launched in the last year alone. And they're doing it in a big way. They can afford to advertise on any space or any radio, any billboard, you name it, it's up for the taking. So their budgets are higher, and therefore they're actually overshadowing domestic operators. And many of them are having to sell their operations to the Chinese. For example, you have Abercrombie and Kent, AB&K, which is a luxury operator that has been here since I was a kid. And they last year signed a deal to sell off their luxury tour operations to a Chinese vacation and holiday home construction company called Zhonghong Holdings. So slowly, yes, you're right, Corbus, we are now handing over, whether we like it or not, the hospitality industry is now moving towards Chinese ownership.
It's just crazy. Is it? I mean, do you think that there is? I mean, okay, let me just kind of put it out there. I don't know if it's true. And I'm not saying this as a leading question, but is there any kind of racism that's going on here that people may be just more comfortable dealing with, white people as tourists, and then they see the Chinese as, unfamiliar, scary kind of, or maybe there's some racist, kind of prejudices that are getting in the way. I'm still trying to get at why people don't go for money. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. It really just doesn't make any sense. It's perplexing to me.
I know. I never saw this coming. Honestly, when I began, I was sure that at least out of all the tourism and hospitality operators in East Africa, 15% or 20% would be on board and we could move forward and build and rebrand them to receive and advertise into the Chinese market. But it has not even reached, I don't even think 3%. And so I'm very frustrated here. Nobody's listening. Conference and event coordinators keep shutting me out. I keep pushing hard and hard, but I find I'm getting more invitations from different countries, not even here in Africa. So it's like my skills are being appreciated by different analysts, travel analysts out there, different universities who have very strong tourism departments also consult with me. But on this continent itself, my home turf has not warmed up to what China has to offer. I don't think it's a racial issue. When you have the number of empty rooms that are hotels, for example, in a town called Entebbe, sometimes you walk into a hotel and find 2/3 of their rooms empty, and they are going at a loss. They have a payroll to support, they have staff to pay, and it's just not working out. But they're not looking at a different market, a different source market to help them stay afloat. And so they're shutting down, they're going to bankruptcy, and some, of course, now folding in and selling off to the Chinese.
Now, Cobus, just before we kind of close the show and everybody walks away depressed thinking of how incompetent Africans are for not taking advantage of this opportunity, I think it's fair to say that a lot of people are struggling with this. I know I've talked to some tour operators in the U.S. and some hotel companies in the U.S. who also don't know how to deal with the Chinese. There is, as you pointed out, Sandra, I think, listen, if you ever want to immigrate to the United States, I think there's going to be a lot of jobs for you because the Chinese, in fact, are going to places like Los Angeles and New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and a lot of hotels still, believe it or not, don't have TV channels for the Chinese. They don't have food for the Chinese. They don't have Chinese-speaking, desk staff. So I don't think this is uniquely an African problem. I think what the issue that we're kind of talking about is that this is just lots and lots of money that's ready to be taken. It's on the table, and people are not taking advantage of that. So, Sandra, if people want to kind of take you up on your advice, they listen to this show and they say, you know what? She's the woman I need to kind of, get in touch with. How can they follow you, and what can they do to get in touch with you?
I'm on Facebook / Welcoming Chinese Tourists, welcoming Chinese Tourists. I'm on Twitter at Sandra Rwese, spelled Sandra Rwese. My website, of course, is available 24 hours a day, and that's guluandhirst.net, Gulu, Gulu, and Hirst, HIRST.net.
Well, in this year of the rooster, we are wishing you prosperity. Happy New Year. And we're hoping that this new year, 2017, will finally be the time when African tour operators wake up and start calling you for their help on how to better welcome Chinese tourists and how to accommodate them. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you as well.
Cobus, it's a head shake for me. We just hear over and over and over again how the Chinese are taking advantage of Africans and how the narrative is always Africa the victim. And here we have, just right in front of us, an opportunity for Africans to thrive and to do something, that would really be profitable in their favor and their interest. And they're just not doing it. And it's just perplexing. Honestly, this is not the show that I expected what we were going to have with Sandra.
Yeah, I know. Come on, Africa.
Yeah, we can do it. So we would like to check back in with Sandra in a few months just to see how things are going. So until then, we'll be back very soon. In fact, in another week with another edition of the China in Africa podcast. Thank you so much for listening.
The discussion continues online. Head over to facebook.com/China Africa Project to share your thoughts on today's show, or follow China Africa News that's updated every 4 hours, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The guys are also on Twitter, where you can find Cobus at Stadanesk or Eric at Eolander. That's EOLANDER. Subscribe to the China Africa podcast on iTunes or download the mobile apps for iOS, Android, or Windows Phone. Just head over to your favorite store and search for China Africa.